Let's get more on that Labour appeal court process now involving government and the public sector unions. You've heard from two of the public sector unions, or two of the public sector union groups rather, on this afternoon. Tony Healy is a Labour consultant. He's been watching this. He joins us now. Tony, good afternoon to you. So government signed a contract and then broke the contract. Do they have a chance of winning this case?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and your viewers. I think, in my estimation, they're going to struggle to avoid having to pay the third year of this agreement. I think there's lots of arguments why perhaps they should not in the circumstances, but we must remember this is a collective bargaining agreement. It was reached in good faith by all parties. And let's not forget that government indicated its intention to resile from this agreement before COVID hit. So yes, COVID has made that circumstance harder for them or more unaffordable, but government had already signaled before COVID that it had no intention of complying with the third term of the three-year agreement.
I mean, in a way, he probably wasn't to know, but in a way, I think that was a major mistake for government, and I suppose Tito Mboweni and Senzo Mkhunu at the time.
Yeah, look, I think there's probably a lot of sympathy for government in terms of, especially if you're a non-public servant and if you're a rating agency and a potential or actual investor. The difficulty is that it's also arguable that the state coffers were also not in a particularly good condition 3 years ago when this agreement was entered into. And yet government signed the agreement, and some would say they signed it because it was during an election year. There is certainly a lot of sympathy for government in the present circumstances with the unprecedented strain on Treasury. But I must be honest, I'm hard pressed to see how government is going to be able to avoid having to pay this third year.
So, what options does government have? Already over the weekend, they sort of floated this idea. Slightly mad idea, and I wondered if there was a whiff of desperation about it, that they would pay the union members a bonus in December, but that bonus would actually be coming from their pensions.
Well, yes, and I think that's the dilemma. It's really a solution that says funds that we would have paid on your behalf into the pension fund, we will now not pay and pay you in rather those pension contributions in cash. So it's no real gain for these. There's no net benefit for those members because what they gain in the cash bonus, they lose in the pension fund contribution. So I don't see that being a solution. Look, there are trees that government can bark up in terms of trying to not pay the third year. There is Regulation 79 of the Public Service Act, which requires Treasury to sign off on wage agreements of this nature. And as I understand, they didn't do so in this case. So that's a tree they can bark up. They can also argue force majeure and say, for reasons beyond our control, for factors beyond our control, we're simply incapable, not regarding the fact that we had intended to comply with this agreement. We're simply no longer capable of doing so. And there's a term, supervening impossibility, which is a slightly technical term. So there are arguments that government can make, but my sense is that, there is more to this than just that, although that is obviously critically important regarding the fiscus. But there's also the whole question of the integrity of the collective bargaining process. And if government itself was to be seen to have failed to meet its obligations in a duly negotiated collective bargaining process, in a three-year deal, Stephen, the government itself wanted. We must remember the unions didn't want a three-year deal originally. It was government that wanted this three-year deal, and for it then to resile in the third year, and be allowed to resile in the third year, I think would have enormous implications for the country generally when it came to the collective bargaining process at large. Notwithstanding the fact that we all know government's in a parlous situation now financially.
I've been interested in the fact that, and unions generally speaking are pretty good in the media. There are lots of unions. That means there are lots of spokespeople. Just today here on Newsfeed, we've spoken to two different union groups on the same thing. Their arguments are roughly the same. They're sort of arguing together, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'd expect them to do that. But not everybody in South Africa agrees with the unions, and there's a large body, perhaps it's mainly a middle-class Twitter thing, but there are people who disagree with the unions, and yet government hasn't really made the argument in public. In a way, Senator Mqunu, the Minister of Public Service and Administration, has been, well, frankly, almost silent. It's really only in court papers that we've seen their argument, and I wonder if that means government's sort of fought this fight with one hand behind its back for some reason.
And Stephen, yes, there may well be a lot of sympathy for government in this particular case. There may be lots of viewers, for example, who are watching this and saying, you know what, I didn't get CPI plus 2%. In fact, I got no increase, no bonus. And in fact, I've got family members who lost their jobs. And here we have the public sector, as you were discussing earlier, getting CPI plus in terms of wage increases. That said, to come to your point, there's only so much that you can do in the court of public opinion in terms of arguing your case. At the end of the day, there are other legal principles that cannot be ignored. As I say, in as much as there may be sympathy for government at this time and governments across the world, the fact still remains that an agreement was entered into in good faith by government in a 3-year deal that government itself wanted at the time. And at a time as well when the state coffers were already in a parlous state. And notwithstanding that, government signed the 3-year agreement, as I said, in an election year. And you can read into that what you will. And it's for that reason that I think it will be difficult for government to resolve from this. We must also remember that the new negotiating season starts this month, or is supposed to. And we also know that government has given notice to the Public Sector Bargaining Council of its intention to freeze wages in the next term. So there are a lot of moving parts to this at the moment. But I think at the end of the day, what is undoubtedly, I think, quite foreseeable is that in 2021, whether we have regardless of the outcome of this process, there will undoubtedly be deadlock on the wage negotiations regarding the new cycle. And we'll probably see widespread public sector strike action in 2021 on that score as well. Sure,
just exactly what we need, isn't it? I mean, you already hinted at how this is going to play out through next year, but I mean, this has the potential to be hugely humiliating to government, possibly quite humiliating to the finance minister. I mean, his recipes just aren't going to be the same for quite some time. A difficult position for Senator Mqunu, the Minister of Public Enterprises and Administration. In the end, government could come away from this with just the bloodiest of bloody noses.
Well, they could. And their only real response to that is going to be a refusal to agree to any increases whatsoever in the next cycle. And that's my sense of what is going to happen. Look, they may pull it off in terms of the other options available to them not to pay in the 3rd year. But my sense is that they won't. Their response to that is almost certainly going to be, and to be honest, even if they pull it off, I see a much harder line, and perhaps rightly so, when it comes to public sector wage increases going forward, for all the reasons that yourself and your viewers will be aware of in terms of the state of Treasury and the fiscus at the moment.
Tony Healy, thank you very much indeed, Labour consultant following this court action in the Labour Appeal Court. I really do appreciate the time.